the Symfony 2 framework for almost 3 years now. That might give you the impression that I am super amazing at Symfony, and that's kind of true, but also 3 years ago is when I kind of started teaching myself programming, so it's not like I've been doing Symfony for 3 years and then like PHP for a decade before that. It's more like 3 years ago I decided I could be a programmer, and Symfony 2 seemed like a great place to start. I'm making this. This is a social strategy city builder RPG web game of awesomeness. It's called Brunelleschi, Age of Architects. Brunelleschi was a real person. That's why it's such a big confusing name. It's because it's a real guy, not because I want to make people's brains hurt, but I kind of want to do that too. It's in beta, so if you wanted to play it, that'd be great. It's at brunegame.com. Let's see, this is what I'm going to go over today. Installation configuration, file structure, my first page, route controller template, creating an entity, interacting with an entity, installing a bundle, creating a command, creating a service, and then I will take your questions. I'm pretty sure that this is all you need to know to use Symfony. There's a lot more you can know, but I'm just going to cover the fundamentals, because the thing about Symfony is what makes it so hard is all the options they give you. So I just take all those out. You're going to learn Symfony, how I use Symfony, and that's going to cut away all the options and therefore all the difficulty. Okay, some prerequisites. Have a web server. I'm going to assume you have a Linux server because that's what I have. This is going to be a theme. Install Composer. This is the command that you run to install Composer. It's really easy. If Composer confuses you at all, check out their site. Oh my goodness, it's so easy. Okay, here is the line that you have to type in to install Symfony automatically. Now it's really, really long and might be difficult for you to parse, so I just kind of broke it down into its component bits to just go over. PHP composer.far, that just tells it to run Composer using PHP. Then create project, Symfony Framework Standard Edition tells it what you want it to install. Then path to web group, you have to change that to wherever you actually want it to install Symfony. And then 2.5 there at the end, that just tells it which version of Symfony to install, and 2.5 means it must be at least version 2.5, and it can't be version 2.6, but anything in between those is fine. Okay, when you type in that command, Symfony's going to try and help you out by asking you a bunch of questions. Most of these, it is safe to ignore and just roll on, and if you need that information later, you can go back and put it into your parameters file and nothing will be hurt. The 3 in blue are the ones that I think you might want to actually look at and consider using something other than the defaults if you want to use a database with your project. If you don't want to use a database with your project, if there's no need for that, you can skip those too. But since most of the things I've ever done that have needed PHP have also needed a database, I went ahead and highlight those. You can just go ahead and put in localhost and then the database name and then your password, and everything else you can ignore and just hit enter, 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 enter. It'll be done.
What about the secret?
You
so
can
say it said secret, this still is not a secret, change it.
Yeah, you can change it later if you need it. Promise.
Okay.
Okay, so now that this wasn't in it when I first started learning it, this is a new tool which is super helpful. Once you get to this point, you can just go to localhost and then where the name of the thing that you just made, the directory, and then web config.php, and it will tell you if there is anything wrong with your setup. And like here, this is pretty normal. What it told me that I had wrong was I needed my app cache and my app logs to have permissions to where the project could access them. That's pretty straightforward, but it's really nice in that it'll just list for you, here's everything that's gonna go wrong that you're gonna have to guess at or just not know what's up. It just tells you instead, which is really nice. It didn't used to. It used to be really confusing. Okay, so now there's this other really nifty command that you can run that will generate a skeleton of a bundle. And a bundle is what Symfony calls your part of it. Everything else is Symfony. The bundle is you. So this creates a skeleton of that. And again, most of them you can just use the defaults, but the ones that I highlight in blue, you really do need to go ahead and look at. For instance, the first thing it asks you is to name your bundle. Name your bundle. The first part of the name is your group name. Any bundles that you create, if you create 10 bundles as part of this project, they'll all going to be under that group name. So I put in my company because that's generally what you're going to want to put there, is your company's name, so that all of your bundles for them will be under that directory. and then slash, and then what you want to call this bundle that you're making. I'm calling this one my first bundle, even though it's not, but it might be yours. Then down further, you do need to select your configuration format. We're selecting YML because I selected YML, and that's how we're doing this. You can select anything you want, but I'm not telling you how. Then, do you want to generate the whole directory structure? That one's highlighted in blue because they default to no, and you should say yes. Okay, now let's go over the directory structure. These are the top level directories in your Symfony project that you really need to have a handle on. App, vendor, web, source. In app, you've got app/cache. That's important because that's where your cache files go. App logs, that's where your logs go. App kernel.php. This file is important because anytime you bundle yours or someone else's into your project, this is the file you have to list those in. So you need to know where it is. It's in app. Then app config parameters, all those questions you answered, they create this file. If you want to change those answers, like you want to add a secret that's more secret than the secret that's default, that's where you put it, parameters.yml. Okay, then config.yml, that's where all of your special configuration for bundles and stuff goes. If you're installing a bundle of someone else's later and it says, you need to put in this configuration, this is where it goes. Then app config security.yml, if you ever need to put in security like a firewall and stuff, this is where you're going to put it. And then app config routing, most of the time you're never going to need this because your routing is going to go in your specific bundle for your specific bundle, but if you ever need routing that is project-wide, this is where it goes. Okay, now everything else. Vendor, that's other people's bundles. When you install other people's bundles, they go in vendor. Don't go there. Web, that's generated assets. Don't go there either. Everything else, if it's not under source, it's not your problem. Don't go there. That's an exaggeration to get you started. Obviously, if you install somebody else's bundle and there are bugs in it, you're going to need to go in vendor. But that's not mostly going to be true, especially if you're working with bundles that have version numbers after them. Those version numbers are going to tell you that they're probably stable at that version, so you're almost never going to need to go into vendor. So as a default, just assume you don't need to be there. With web, since most of the stuff in web is generated, you really don't need to be there. If you find yourself in web, question yourself. Let's see. Source. Source is you. Source is your everything. Source is everything that you will ever really make. It is your all and your everything. In source, you're going to find wherever you call your group name, in this case, my company. In the my company directory, or whatever you name your group, you will find all of the bundles that you've ever made. Right now, it'll just be the one, my first bundle. And inside the my first bundle directory, or whatever you name your bundle, that's where you will find everything else. So, in my first bundle, you've got some basic things that you need to know about in here. The controller directory. Controllers hold the logic for rendering a page. The resources directory contains the config directory, which contains your local routing file. That's where all your actual routing is going to be in this routing file. And then it also contains services.yml. And if you ever need to make custom services, which you might, they're really super useful because services are special in that they can be accessed by controllers or by commands or by other services, so they're really stupid useful. And then also in the resources directory is the public directory. That's where the JavaScript and images and the CSS that you should touch are, not in the web directory. The web directory will grab those and pull them into itself. That's why you don't need to mess with it. This is the one you need to mess with. It's way down in your source directory. And then also in the resources is views, and that's where all your templates are. And templates are, of course, the part that people actually see. So to look at the most probably important parts is at the top and at the bottom. Controller, that's all your logic. And then views, that's your templates displaying your logic. Yeah. Okay, so cute. Okay, moving on. To make your first page, first you're going to make your route to your page. Now, since you told it to go ahead and create a default skeleton for your bundle, it's going to have some defaults, and we're going to work with those. The default route is, it obviously takes the name of the route from the name that you put in. So the one I've got is my company, my first. home page. And that first line, that's the route's name. And that's what you're going to use when you're calling that route inside your project. Instead of the full URL, you'll just use that name, which can be really easy because it can be much shorter than your full URL. Then the second line, that's the route path. That means that yourwebsite.com / everything after that / that actually tells it where to go, that's the path. And then the third line for every route, that's the actual definition. That tells it which controller to go in, and then which function in that controller to go in. And then at the very end of that definition, if you want to, you can put a comma, and then you can list all the defaults for any variables that you have in your route. Anytime you see the path, the name there is in brackets. That tells me that name, that's not actually a part of the path. Name is a variable. And so whatever goes after hello /, so if I put hello world, world would be the name of, world would be the value of the variable name, which would be sent to my controller function. Pretty straightforward, even if I'm confusing it. Please, I'm confusing. That's kind of a hard request, huh? Okay, so we're just going to modify that to be what we need. So we're going to change that really stupid long name that it generated to index. And we're going to change the path just to a /, and that means it's going to be our default. If you go to mywebsite.com / app.php, this is the route that we'll execute because it's just got that / there. And we're going to have our default be the same one that they generated because they were already using index, and we want to use index, so we're leaving that alone. But you see, we took off the variable thing because we don't need a variable right now. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the default controller. You can see that the default controller has its default controller action in it already, and it's the index action, so we're just going to modify that instead of creating a brand new one. And you can see that by default it has that name in it, where it receives that name from the curly brackets, whatever we put there in the URL, plugs it into that variable, and then we can use it inside this function, which is awesome. But we're not doing that. Instead, we're going to modify this. And we took the variable out because we didn't put a curly bracket thing in there, so it's not going to expect a variable. It'll throw an error if we ask for one. So we took that out, and then we just gave it some basic information to send to the template. We created the variable title. We're calling this my first page. And then I created a simple array with 3 little messages, and I made colors be the keys because I want to show you how you can totally access array keys once you're in your template, which can be super useful. I don't really think that you would want to name array keys like this. It's just to demonstrate. Okay, so then you see down at the bottom, return, and then it calls a function called render. It does exactly what it sounds like. Render just says, all right, I'm going to call a template now, and you can see it's calling the template. It's telling it that it's going to be in the default directory. It's telling it we're going to be in this bundle. That's the first thing. My company, my first bundle, so you know what bundle we're in. And then it says, I'm going to be in the view's default directory. That's what that second thing is, default. And then it tells it the name of the template to grab, which of course is index.html. That's quick. And it then gets an array where I send it all of the information that I've generated that I would like it to have. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at that template. The default template, obviously, it was just a hello world template, so it just had hello and then the name variable, which is what it started out with. And you can see that the name, it doesn't have a $sign because this isn't PHP. This is HTML with Twig. And the way Twig displays variables is just by surrounding them with those curly brackets, those double curly brackets. That just says, show me this. Now, if you don't want to show, if you instead want to do, then instead of the double curly brackets, you get a single curly bracket and then a % sign, and that can surround simple logic. Twig can do really useful, simple things that you might want to do in a template, like an if-else statement, or it can assign a value to a variable, or it can do a for loop. You don't want to do any of your heavy lifting logic with it, but there are certain things that are really super useful to be able to do very quick and easy in your template, and Twig facilitates that. All right, so we're going to take this default template, and we're going to modify it to use the new controller that we modified. So now, first we're going to check and see if the length of our title variable is greater than 0. That's another useful thing that Twig can do for you. Just type length, and it will tell you how long something is. So And that works for arrays also. It'll count arrays as well as the length of a string. Super useful. Okay, so we're checking and seeing if the title is longer than 0, and if it is, we're displaying it in header tags. And then we're going to loop through all of our messages and see we're using our key there. Since I made them all colors, we're using the key to assign the CSS color just to show you how useful it can be to just be able to grab that key and use it in what you're doing. And it displays something like that. It won't display it in a blue box. I did that so you could see it better, but everything else. Okay, if you have a really complex project, or if you start out with a simple project that turns out to be really complex, like I did, you might want to think about specializing your controllers. In a simple project, everything can go in one controller, like default or like page. It's not a big deal. But when you start to have lots of pages and lots of logic, you may want to specialize. And I just put in some examples that I ended up using. I ended up naming things in a way that would make it really easy for me to scan through giant lists of controllers because I ended up with way too many controllers. So I have things like fragment data is a whole section of them, and then I have what is fragment data of, like building, character, district, settlement, world, and then controller.php, because all controllers end with the word controller. And inside, all those controller functions end with the word action. You can get some bizarre errors by forgetting to put the word action at the end of your controller function name. So please remember, whatever you want to call your controller function, like index, must actually be index action or errors. Actually, the specific error you will get is it will tell you that your controller is unreachable. If you get a controller is unreachable error, you probably forgot to put the word action on the end of it. Okay, so yeah, the way I organized my controllers was I broke it up by, for instance, the ones that start with form render forms. The ones that start with fragments aren't whole pages, they're just pieces of pages. The ones that start with fragment data don't do anything, they just display data. Stuff like that, to keep it straight in my brain. And that can be really useful, just so you know. Okay, so creating an entity. We're using Doctrine. You don't have to, except today, because I use Doctrine, and so that's what I know how to tell you to do. Again, with Symfony, the cool thing about it is you can pick and choose exactly what you want. You don't have to do it any one way, but this is the one way I did it. Okay, so first, since it doesn't assume you're going to need entities, you're going to have to create your entity directory. So go ahead and do that. It's in your bundles directory. So in the same place that you've got controller and resources, in that you just add entity. And then create a new PHP file in that directory. We're going to call ours item.php because what we're going to want to create is the item table. You just name it whatever you want the name of your tables. And then we're going to use annotations to define our entity. Again, you don't have to, except that you're doing with me, and that's how I did it. Okay, so Doctrine has some really handy annotations like decimal, and then the scale tells it how many decimal places you want to allow for, or string, and then length tells it how long you want the string to be. Very straightforward stuff that I'm sure you're used to if you've ever worked with a database. But it's just really straightforward, it's all in one place, and you can edit in one place. And the thing I really like about it is that updating a database is really stupid easy. You just modify the file, and then you do the database update command, and it just does everything for you, no worries, it's fantastic. And I include reference, like, on a lot of these, because there's no way I'm cramming all of this data into a talk. So anytime you see reference, if you want to know more, go there. Okay, so our new entity, here's what it looks like. You can see that we have included Doctrine mapping because we're using those annotations. You can see the annotations tell it the name of the table there at the top, and then our class defines it underneath. And here I included the auto-generated ID. And then we can define custom fields just like that. You can see I've showed you how to do a string, a decimal, and an integer, and I included nullable equals true because that's a super useful thing to be able to do. I'm sure you know it's really useful to be able to make a field null, and if you forget to put that there, it's not going to let you. So that can go on anything, nullable equal true, keep it in mind. Then we update the database with PHP app console and PHP space app console. If you're in the top level of your project, that's always going to be what you start out your commands with. And then Doctrine, schema, update, force, and suddenly your database is exactly how you defined in this file. It's fantastic. Now, if you want to be able to use stuff like get this, set that, you can have Symfony automatically generate those for you, just getters and setters, so you don't have to type them in by hand, which is super easy, and that's what that second command there is. It's just, Symfony, please make my getters and setters for me because I am lazy, thank you. And that's a save command. You can run that 40 times and it's never going to create anything more than what your entity defines for it, which I really like. I really like save commands because any command that I can accidentally do twice and ruin everything, I will. That's forget that I did it 5 seconds ago. Okay, so then we're going to access that. We're going to add access to that into our controller. And there are a couple of facets to this. If you just want to interact with a table, you don't need to put use at the top. Use blah, 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 your entity. You don't need to put it at the top if you're just going to interact with it. But if you're going to make a new one, you have to put it at the top or it will freak out and not let you do anything because it doesn't know what you're talking about. Also, if you want to do type hinting, like if you're passing an entity to a function and you want to be able to type hint that, you've got to put the use at the top. If not, then not. Okay, so in order to use the entity manager, you need to put this line at the top of whatever function you're going to use it in. And I always use EM because that's the documentation that I read the first time I was learning to use this. You can name it whatever you want. I've seen other people do other things, but this is always going to be how I do it because this is how I learned it. So you're saying, I want to get the doctor and manager, and that just gives you a lot of easy functions for grabbing tables and dealing with them later. So yeah, it's useful to have. And here you can see some examples of how to interact with an entity in a controller function. That top one, you see items equals em get repository and then find all. That's the super quick, easy, dirty way. If you just have some very simple grab parameters like I want everything, or I want a specific one with this ID, or I want everything that matches this very simple, definable thing, then you can just use that one liner. If you want to get complex, then that's what the create query builder is for. You can get complex with that. You can do, so far I haven't found anything that I've needed to do that I couldn't do with this, but that I would be able to do with just plain old MySQL calls. So I think it's awesome. Maybe you'll find something, but I haven't yet. And you can see set max results 1, get a single result, order by, all that good stuff, and then recommend is now an array of the objects that I grabbed. Well, in this case, the single object that I grabbed, but it could be more if I told it we could have that. Let's see. Okay, now in a template, we can also use just a straight up entity. Instead of parsing it into some sort of fancy array for your template, if you just want the template to have everything in that entity, you just pass it right along, and then it can access individual aspects of that entity object just by dot and then the name of the field, which is really crazy convenient. It pretends it's an array. It treats it just like an array. I've had that not be true once. One time it didn't treat it like an array and I had to use like get this instead of just the name. I don't know why it did that, but 99.99% of the time it's just going to treat it like a normal array and it'll be fine. Okay, so it's one of the things that you're going to want to do. You can see the external bundle is really weird and getting an eyeball from the normal looking one because I like elements. A lot of the time, the reason Symfony is awesome is because if you want to do something really normal, you can go find where somebody else has already done that normal thing and just plug it in because they made a bundle for it. Now you can just install that bundle. Like all of my logins, well, all but one of my logins, I didn't write. I went and found a bundle that does it. My form login, that's a bundle. My Twitter login, no, that one I made. The Google one, that's a bundle. Facebook, that's a bundle. All those logins, bundle. Fantastic. Why reinvent the wheel? So this is the basics of how you install a bundle. You add it to your composer.json in the require block. You just add the little line with the, and most of these will tell you, like right there in their documentation, here's the line you copy and paste into your JSON, so into your composer.json. And then you add it into the app kernel that we talked about earlier. It's just one line. And Symfony defaults with a bunch of Symfony's made up of bundles, so you'll already see a bunch of them listed, and you just copy that formatting exactly, and it's great. And then you can check the README, and they will tell you if there are any special configuration things that you need to add. But generally, adding a bundle is super straightforward and easy. The one thing that I would say look for when you're picking your bundle is if they do version numbers. If they do version numbers, then those version numbers are going to be stable. If it's always like master, if they don't have version numbers, then you're kind of setting yourself up for an unpleasant day, because if you put it in and it's always master, then every time you update, it's going to get their latest stuff, and you don't know if they've made any changes, and it could break your everything. I've had that happen a few times. It's never taken me more than a day to get everything back online, but unless you're up for losing that day whenever somebody else feels like it, look for bundles that use version numbers. Okay, creating command. Commands can be super useful. Like if you need to do any sort of housekeeping on your database, or if, for like me, I do all sorts of timed events because it's a video game. They need to have things like you've gotten action points back. It's important. So these things I just set up a cron job to trigger commands that I've written on a timeline, and then it just happened, and it's awesome. So you might want a command. So this is how you make one. Create the new directory, command, just like we created entity. We create command, and then we make a new file inside of it with whatever you want the name of your command to be, and then the word command.php, and then create your command file. And you can see we've got these three things at the top here that our Symfony includes: container aware command, and then input and output interface. And the input interface lets you send values into your command, and the output interface, I think you get it in, out. Okay. Okay, so this is how you set up a command. You configure it, you give it a name, you give it a description. If you want variables to be required, if you want somebody to have to specify things that are going to be used in your command, you specify them in your set description. And then your execute is what's executed when your command goes off. And you can add a lot of other functions in there that are called by the execute, but the execute is what's going to execute. And see that line out, output right line? That's super useful. That will output directly into your console. So if you want feedback from your command while it's running, say if you don't know for sure it works yet and you need status reports, super useful. But also, like if you have just sub-functions, they can't use that, but you can just use bar dump and it'll output right to your console. Maybe it's hackery, but it works. Okay, so here's like an example of a custom command instead of just the right line. As you can see, I have, you can see, you can do stuff, it's items. And then this one is the example where I show you how you can put in, how you can ask for variables, use that set definition, new input argument, and then you tell it what name it is, and you tell it whether or not it's required, and you can give a description of it so that if somebody's like, what is this? It will tell it, this is what I'm asking for here. And so then in order to get those, anything that's entered in that way, you see it says input get argument and then the name of the argument. And so now you have all of those as variables inside your execute function, which is awesome. Yeah. Okay, so creating a service, also super useful. Create a new services directory, just like we did command, just like we did entity. Create a new service file. These don't end with service. I don't know why that's where we leave off the forcing things to have the name of what it is at the end of the name, but here we leave off that tradition and it's not required. So it's not named character effect service, it's just named character effect. So remember in resources config, there was that services.yml file. This is where we use it. That's where we define our service. So at the top, we've got this brand, that's just shorthand. We made a parameter that tells it where our services are so that we could just call that later on, as you can see. And then here's where we're actually defining our service, our character effect. We're telling it where it is, and we're telling it what to pass it. And that's very important because services are totally isolated from everything else. They know about nothing unless you give it to them. They're not connected in any way to anything. So here you can see I'm passing in the entity manager because I want to be able to interact with entities inside that service. If I didn't pass that in, it would not believe that it had a database or access to it. Okay, so here's the actual service itself, not the definition, which goes in services.yml under resources config, but the actual services file, which goes in the services directory. Okay, so we've got our namespace, we've got use the entity manager. We've got we see I do want to use type hinting here, and so I had to include the use my entity at the top. All right, so and this is just an example of why you might want a service. This is my level up service. I tell it which character, and it increments their level by 1, and it sends back a success message. It can be more complicated than that, but that's a good example. And this is how you access your service. From a controller, it's super simple. It's just this, get, and then the name, and that's really it, and then you just call it. From a command, it's only ever so slightly more difficult in that you have to go this, get container, and then the exact same thing, because see, in the controller already knows what this container is, but in the command, you have to be specific. But it's the exact same thing. You can call it in almost the exact same way. Super useful. Questions? Yes?
In your game, so how do you deal with like the resource manager? Do you have a resource manager for your game that you got set up as far as like, I don't know anything about your game, so taking your images, your dialogue, your fonts, and things like this, and organizing them or loading them on the client side correctly, or not, reloading them, or reuse what you've already loaded.
Symfony's pretty good about it. I use Aesthetic, which is Symfony's asset manager, but honestly, one of the things that we did that really got performance on that level better is we've started incorporating Cloudflare, but we can only incorporate it partially because some of our content's far too dynamic and it has no idea how to tell when to update. So very carefully integrating Cloudflare has helped a lot.
Okay.
Do you know what Cloudflare is?
I've heard of that. I don't use it.
It's a content distribution network.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that. Yes?
What technology are you using to connect the client side to your back end? Are you just making Ajax calls every so often, or are you got some real-time stuff with web something's going on?
That first thing, Ajax. Although that's just the web client, which is what I'm writing. I also write an API that we have a Unity developer working on a Unity client for, so I don't know what that is, Unity. But me, I use Ajax. Yeah?
The vendor bundles that you're using, do you commit those to version control, or do you keep those external and kind of just dynamically load them when?
The vendors directory is part of what I put in my git ignore. So the vendors directory, which is where all of their unpacked bundles live, does not get put as part of my repository. But the definitions for them, like the composer.json stuff that tells it what I would want and all of the installs in the app kernel, that is committed. So basically anytime I want to deploy it, I just run the composer update or install. I can never remember which, I always have to look it up. But one of those, whichever one is correct. You run the composer command that is correct, and then it installs all of those. That's why the version number is so important, is because if you don't want to have to store everything in that vendor directory, and you do not want to have to keep that in a repository, it's massive. It's really important to know what you're going to get when you pull it fresh, and if people aren't using version numbers, you have no idea what you're going to get when you pull it fresh. But if they are, it's going to be the same thing every time, and it's beautiful to not have to keep up with all of that extra data.
Cool.
Yes?
So what does the web folder actually store in it? I know you said it was generated files and whatnot.
Well,
Doesn't it store some of the stuff from Aesthetic?
Yeah.
Assets or something.
Yeah, it stores basically when you're deploying, you issue a command that says, please take all of my stuff that's in my bundles and move it into the web directory. I always use a link. You can tell it either to use a link, or you can tell it to just hard move everything. I always tell it to use a link so that it updates. But yeah, basically what the web directory has in it is links to or copies of stuff from bundles, assets, and all bundles, like your vendors and stuff. If they've got assets, it also grabs those. You got assets, it grabs those. It also happens to contain the app.php and appdev.php, which are Symfony files that I don't think anyone ever needs to touch. I could be wrong, I'm just new.
Just like the bootstrapping code.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. More questions? Yes.
So do you specifically have to tell it to publish those assets, or does it, or can
Um,
it just as they're needed?
If you're in dev, it automatically does. If you have been in production mode, then you need to tell it to do a fresh dump, and it's PHP app console, assets install, send link web, and then because I use aesthetic, I also run PHP app console aesthetic dump. If you're not using aesthetic, you don't have to do that, but the first one, yes. Yes.
Is this open source?
Yes. This is all open source.
Do you have a link for it?
For what?
The GitHub profile or
Your
your project?
Oh, my project. My project isn't open source yet, but will be. And I'm so glad you asked. Yes, actually, we're committed to open source, but we're doing a 3-year delay. And I'm not really sure whether that's because we want to make money or whether we want to spare my feelings, but I'm fine with it either way. Basically, anything gets committed, it gets released to open source, which means that everything that, starting January of this year, so in about 2 years, everything that I had done January of this year, all of my embarrassing spaghetti code mistakes will become open source, and then you can laugh at me, your heart's content. But yeah, I'm actually really looking forward to that. But yeah, it's going to be on a 3-year delay, and then everybody can play with my strategy game. Other questions? Including about my game, which I am totally happy to answer.
Can you show us real quick?
Yeah, totally.
She was waiting for that one. Right, we didn't see it yet. It's like Jaws.
Oh yeah, let me, okay, first, yeah, totally. First, there's this, I repeat that, and then look, haha. See, I already remember it. Yeah, we're on Rocket Hub and Indiegogo if you want to contribute financially. We're on IndieDB if you want to vote us up, do that. Yeah, we're asking for $500 on Rocket Hub and $500 on Indiegogo. It's really not very much, but it's a really great way. Like, we're doing really stupid long campaigns because we're kind of doing this because we don't have an advertising budget to bring in players, and it's working. We're getting a slow but steady trickle of more beta testers, which I desperately need to play my game. And then, okay, so also, since we're doing multiple little bitty fundraisers, I'm tracking all of our support progress, all of our support materials and everything on ESOP Games, that's us, .com/app.php/support, and that's all of the information on all of our hopes and dreams. It's great. Okay, so yeah, now I'll show you the actual game. I've never seen it on a Mac. I hope it's not awful. So far, so good. All right, now I'm going to have to log in, which means I'm probably going to end up having to log you out of your computer.
Have fun.
No, I logged you in.
Sweet.
Okay, now you have a new account for my game.
Please
I totally
your
meant to do
number.
that. Awesome, play my game. Now it's enforced. Okay, so it starts out when you first log in. It assumes that you want to make a hero character. There are actually 2 kinds of characters you can make, a hero and a lord. You should have me do this presentation. The hero characters are super easy to get into and run around and play. Lord characters are the more in-depth, they're the more city. You can administer government as a lord. You can't administer government as a hero. So that's kind of the differentiation. I'm gonna try, okay. Do this. I'm gonna log out and log in as me. This is gonna work. Log out. I'm sure you can all see my password right now. I have to change it when I get home.
It's like 11 or 12 bullet points per number.
Did I press the button? I don't know, it's a Macintosh. Can't tell.
Yeah, it's weird.
Did I break it right before I got here or what?
Now it's just the Wi-Fi here. There you go.
There you go.
It's still not done loading. Okay, there we go. Jeez peas. Okay, so I am a lord in the wilderness, and so I'm going to move because I don't want to be in the wilderness, because if you live in a settlement, then you get actions from all of their districts, and if you're in the wilderness, you don't. I don't have an invite code, so I don't need that. So let's go to Venice. We're moving to Venice now. How lovely for us. I am really impressed by the beta testers that we have had, because it's been, like when I first launched this in January, it was bad. Like, because I'd never had players before, so I didn't know, it worked fine for me. I did the exact same thing every time, and it always worked, and I had no idea that anyone would ever do anything differently than what I would do. I was wrong. Okay, so now we've moved, and we're a resident of Venice, and if we had administration of districts, we would see them on the left, but we are just a lowly peasant. We have no districts of our own. So let's go to our actions page. And I'm level 1, so I will have very few things to do, I mean, by my scale. By anyone else's scale, why do I have so many actions at level 1? I don't know, because we like making games. And so we put all of the games we wanted to make into this one, because we're making it. Okay, so here on the side are all of the different action menus, and we've got military and entertainment and defensive. We can watch for vandals, we can walk the walls, we've got guard duty. And it gives you a little description and picture, and it tells me that I don't have enough action points because this, okay, over here you can see that I get this because I'm in a district that has the inner walls, which gives me the walk the walls action, but I am not high enough level to do it because I only have 11 action points in a day because I'm level 1, meaning I've done no actions, because basically any actions at all at this point would level me up. But walk the walls takes 110 action points, so I can't do that. But I can look at it because I live in a settlement where it's possible. Okay, so I'm going to go to labor, and I'm going to harvest, because everybody can harvest. You get well, everybody in a settlement can harvest, because the first district that you get in a settlement is the field, because it's set in the Renaissance, and you can't have a settlement if you don't grow food. So I can harvest, and I'm going to do that. And let's, I don't know, I might level up. No, oh, almost. One more. Yay! Load. Yay! Okay, I leveled up. Alright, you guys want to know anything specific about my game, or shall I just play? I'm just kidding. I'm going to let you guys play Jack with me. Yeah, what's up?
Will you have those like cool tutorial bubbles that come up and they'll like kind of guide you through like an initial play?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes, I do have that. And also I have the option to turn those off in your preferences, because that was one of the first things requested by players when I put in the tutorials, because I had a bunch of players who were like, we've been playing this a month, can you tell it to shut up about all the new stuff? And I'm like, yeah, that's totally a checkbox in your preferences. Sorry about that. Yeah. Yeah, actually there are a ridiculous number of preferences, because apparently I made this game to prove that I'm smart, because I come from Texas where girls aren't allowed to be smart. Yes?
What are you using to get those cool fancy shit?
Oh, I highly recommend that you cheat. I use jQuery UI and Twitter Bootstrap. And between jQuery UI and Twitter Bootstrap, I can make UIs. Woohoo! This is the preferences where you can make your bio, and you can say how many market offers you want. Oh yeah, it's a totally player-driven market. That was really hard to write. I'm very proud of that. You should play my game. So you can say how many market offers you want per page, how many forum messages you want per page. You can pick the display style, and that means there are all sorts of places where, depending on what display style you selected, it'll show either just text or just a picture or both. And then you can pick your theme. These aren't great yet. Like, there are themes, and they will change the look of it, and some people do use them, but I mostly live in this one, and so this one's the one that's gotten the most attention, so the other ones are kind of...
Pick steampunk.
Pick steampunk, okay. Enthusiasm, yay! And now, there's there's no scroll. How do I get down to the button? Ha ha ha! I figured it out.
Two-finger draw.
Oh, whew, fancy. Okay, so yeah, steampunk. Steampunk is very like dark, only there are more oranges. Yes.
Is there like social interaction with other players on this game?
Yeah, actually, this is a very social game. Yeah, it's a super social game. It's actually designed to let you build and run settlements with your friends. In the maximum size settlement, you can have up to 49 of your friends as co-governors, governing individual districts in your settlement. It's actually designed to allow settlements that are far too complex for a single person to run them. And I can vouch for the fact that we've got 3 guys that are running settlements all by themselves with their, well, only one of them is still doing it. Only one of our players is actually still managing to run their settlement all by themselves, them and their alt army, because we don't mind. You can alt as much as you want. It'll break your brain. I mean, like a city. Yeah, all of there are no cities in the game that players didn't make. There are no markets that players didn't market. There are no laws that players didn't law. It's just the game players. Yeah. I don't know. It's all about freedom and working together. So it's not super popular. But yeah, it's all about working together. Actually, a major component of the game is right down here. It is the fully integrated PHP BB forums. I use PHP BB because they're really robust forums, but I had to do a lot of surgery to get them integrated with the game. If you log into the game and then you click forums, suddenly, voila, you have a forum account that is that character. And that is actually part of the gameplay. Down at the bottom, 2 fingers scroll.
Single sign in with a form. That's going to be a real bitch.
I've tried that before.
Okay, see the bottom section there, game data? The game actually sends you forum messages about things that happen in the game. Since she doesn't run a settlement or anything, she's not going to have a huge lot in this area. But if we click, you see her name's Alice, and so she gets her own automatically generated forum thread called Alice. That was hard. Okay, and see, she gets announcements. She gets a record of her actions and their results. She gets information about upkeep, because you do have to pay upkeep, like if you own a building or if you have equipment. Or if you have military units, they require upkeep too. You can see you get messages on any scenarios that you participate in. Scenarios are like actions that take a really long time and multiple people contributing to them. And they also exist as an integrated state with the forums. If you are in a scenario and you click the scenario, you get a double window, the top of which is all of the game interactions and the bottom of which is all of the forum interactions. And then army, diplomacy, combat, market transactions. These are all things that the game automatically tells you about in relation to your character. Yes? 1,000. Actually, no. There are levels and there are ranks.
That's
if
how
you're
you
a
reach
lord
the one.
and you are 1,000th level, you're not done yet, because there are also ranks. And as a lord, you can rank up by gaining importance, in addition to leveling up by gaining experience. And some actions give you importance, but the best way to get importance is to get people to pledge their fealty to you, and then you get their importance too. It's kind of great. But the person, each rank has a certain amount of importance that you have to have in order to get to that rank. But if you're at rank 13, which is the highest rank, then whoever is rank 13 and has the most importance, or actually the magical unique rank 14, only one person gets to be rank 14 at any given time, it means that you are the most awesome lord of that type. So there can only ever be 5 of those on the server at any given time, but all 5 of those players would have to be rank 13, and nobody's achieved that yet. So even though our current beta testers have a kind of semi-player conspiracy that we totally allow because they're testing our game, thank you, where they kind of worked out on their own that they would all do a chain fealty pledge up through to one person to try and get to the max rank as quickly as humanly possible. That one person is the one guy running one settlement with his alt army. And I think he might be smarter than me. No, he's definitely smarter than me to be able to do this. Wow. Also, He's so great about telling us when we're wrong about Renaissance history. He knows everything wrong in Renaissance history. I'm serious. It's great. First of all, we were pronouncing the name wrong. It's not Brunelleschi, it's Brunelleschi. Did not know that until this player corrected us. We also didn't know that Aesop is Aesop. So our company is named Aesop Games, no matter what we called it for the first year. So yeah, History Nerds player game. Yeah.
Have you thought? I just like I think 3 weeks ago found like IRC web chat things that you can integrate with your web client.
Oh yeah, it's up here.
Do you have one? Yeah.
Okay, mouse over. Yes. The Mac will not defeat. Join live chat. Here you go.
Very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It's Ajax.
All right.
Anything else you want to know if it's in the game? It's in the game. Yeah, okay, I guess you can play that for now. Thank you!
So how many hours have you put into that?
When did I say I started learning Symfony?
3 years ago.
Yeah, a month after that I started designing the database structure.
Yeah, me, yeah.